I wanted to play blues and jazz, and so I had to find adults to go play with. So that's what pushed me to kind of start playing really young. The second I heard someone applaud for an improvisation, something I was making up and playing guitar, I'm never going to do anything else. Music just was something magical to me. I'd get home from school and pick up my guitar, and whatever happened that day, good or bad, went out the window. And this was all that mattered. This made me happy and smiling, and it became how I identified myself. Yeah, so I got my first guitar when I was 3 years old. My dad stopped on the way home from the hospital the day my sister was born to buy me a guitar and a tennis racket. It's the most random thing ever. He played tennis, he did not play music. Nobody in my family plays guitar. But my birthday and my sister's are very close, so my third birthday kind of got overlooked because my mom was getting ready to have the baby. So she was born a few days later after my birthday, and on the way home from the hospital, he brought me home this toy guitar and little tennis racket. And I took to the guitar right away. You know, for the first couple of years, I just dragged it around the house, but it was obvious that I dug it. It was something I liked. And then when I was 6 years old, I asked them for some lessons. So they found a school down the street. Back then, there were all those chain Yamaha type music schools. And they would try to upsell you immediately. You'd have one lesson, and then you need 6 books, and you need to buy a new full-size guitar, and you need this and this and that. And my dad smelled like that wasn't cool right away. So the next thing he did was find a University of Miami graduate, jazz guitar student. This guy had just graduated college, and he had an ad in the back of the paper for guitar lessons, and I started going to him. And I think I went to him for a year until he moved to New York to chase his jazz guitar dreams. And that kind of got the ball rolling for me, and I haven't looked back ever since. I started gigging when I was 12, really young, because I improved very quickly, and I was kind of obsessed with this stuff, and I was looking for people to play with my age. But back then, if you were as interested in your instrument and serious about it as I was, you weren't into the music I liked, because I liked blues and jazz and rock and roll and soul, and back then was heavy metal and grunge, and it was the tail end of heavy metal going into grunge. And I liked that stuff too, but I didn't play it. I wanted to play blues and jazz, and so I had to find adults to go play with. So that's what pushed me to kind of start playing really young. And yeah, we started going to like these open jams, and I would sign the list and get up to play with these adult groups. And the audience would go crazy because I was this short little kid in a Yankees hat playing guitar that was bigger than me, you know, but I didn't care. Like the second I heard someone applaud for an improvisation, something I was making up and playing guitar, I was never going to do anything else with my life. And my dad had a massive record collection, and he's mostly a rock and roll guy, but he loved blues. My mom loves soul, but also they had just the right amount of jazz in their record collection. So by that I mean they had the shit that I needed to hear. He had Round Midnight, and he had Kind of Blue and Giant Steps, and he had, you know, Miles and Monk and Train and Freddie Hubbard and you know, the things I needed to hear, Wes Montgomery. So I was lucky to kind of hear some of that stuff, and it was started to tweak my ear. And then I heard Charlie Parker, and that was the big change of, wait a minute, I really like this, because I was automatically hooked to blues. Like the first time I heard B.B. King and Albert King, that was it. Like, oh, I want to do that. So I dove into that headfirst into blues and learning all that I could, and getting into the weeds on who's, you know, Otis Rush, and who played with Muddy and Howlin' Wolf. Oh, Hubert Sumlin, and who's this Pat Hare guy, and who are the, you know, I got into it big time because I loved it. And Charlie Parker was the first, like, look to the side of, wait a minute, this is unreal. But I could relate because some of the tunes were blues tunes or rhythm changes. There were changes that I could understand. It wasn't so abstract yet, like Giant Steps or something, where I couldn't relate. All of a sudden, I heard Charlie Parker and was like, wait a minute, I hear what's going on here. This is a blues, I know what it is, but he's doing all this other stuff. So Charlie opened the door into jazz for me, and he's still the first place I look when I listen. He's my favorite. He's probably my favorite soloist improviser in the world on any instrument. Honestly, I knew it was it right away because I just loved it so much. There was nothing I cared about. The only other thing I wanted to do was play baseball, and I sucked. You know, I really loved it, and I cared, and I tried really hard, but I couldn't hit a curveball, you know, or I couldn't hit, once speeds got up above 80 and 90 miles an hour, I couldn't hit. So the only two things I ever loved that much were guitar and baseball, and music just was something magical to me. I'd get home from school and pick up my guitar, and whatever happened that day, good or bad, went out the window. And this was all that mattered. This made me happy and smiling, and it became how I identified myself. I wasn't, Josh this or that. I was the guitar player. And so it was always kind of that way for me. But once I started going to the jams and playing with adults, that was when it became clear, like, maybe I can do this, because I started to get both positive and negative, but constructive criticism and feedback from my peers and from guys way older than me who would give me the thumbs up and say, dude, you're doing it. And they would notice if I made improvements because I was obsessed. So if someone told me I was messing something up, I would never make that mistake again. I'd come back the next week and that would not have happened. So like if there was a chord that I didn't know how to play over, or some weird thing, or my time was bad, I'd go home and work on that so that I'd get the wink and the nod the next time from these older guys that I respected. And yeah, once that started happening, there was nowhere else I was ever gonna be. And once I got into high school, I was gigging every weekend, sometimes on school nights. My parents would allow it as long as I held up my end of the bargain with my grades and classwork and all that, which I always did. I wasn't like a very studious guy, but I'm a relatively bright dude, and I was able to do the bare minimum to get B's for my entire school career, because I knew that would keep everybody happy and I could do what I wanted to do. And yeah, I knew there was no going back. I knew I wasn't going to college. I knew none of that because I was gigging so much already all through high school. We went on tour for the first time when I was 15 in the summer break because I'd made a record. I was already writing songs, and so I was ready for this. It was all I ever wanted. So Derek Trucks and I grew up very close in Florida, and we played a lot of gigs together at really young ages. We've known each other our whole lives. There's a lot of similarities in our upbringings and the way we started playing young. So we ended up playing together a lot coming up. And Derek had an SG, so I wanted one. And I found one in the back of there was a magazine in Florida called a Rag magazine, and it had classifieds in the back, and it said 67 Gibson SG, $250. I made my dad drive me over there and buy that guitar. It was a piece of junk. It had been trashed, refinned. Nothing was original on it, but I played that for a while. But like I said, it was also the 90s, so I had a Charvel with Floyd Rose, red with black crackle paint on it. So I had that guitar, and that was it. I had practice amps. I didn't know I needed an amp that would work at a gig until I started going to do these things. And I'd go to the jams, and I wouldn't need to bring one because I'd have a house amp. But the first time I remember vividly, this band I had been going to sit in with at jams, they asked me to play a gig with them. They said, hey, why don't you do this gig with us next week? We'll pay you $80. I was like, what? Amazing. But I showed up at this gig with my little crate practice amp, and it was like, wait a minute, I can't hear myself, and they were like, you need to get a real amp, man. So my dad took me to this music store that I grew up going to called the Musicians Exchange, which doesn't exist. And they used to always have tons of, at that time, vintage gear. It was just whatever, Silverface Fender amps as far as the eye could see. So I bought a Silverface Pro Reverb. That was my first real amp. I think I paid $400 for it on money that I'd been saving from gigs. Bought my first overdrive pedal, a Boss Turbo Overdrive. It was awful, awful pedal. But I thought it was the greatest thing ever. Finally, I could hear myself and everything worked. And so that was the beginning of my gear obsession and learning about gear. I bought that DOD wah volume pedal, the little teeny one. And I was like, why doesn't this sound like Jimi Hendrix? Because the wah is nothing like a Vox or a Crybaby, but I didn't know any better. That went back to the store like 4 days later, and I got a real Crybaby first. But when I was playing back then in Florida, so let's say from 13 till 20, all I did was play my own music. So the only tones I cared about were my tones. So I wasn't like, yeah, I was obsessed with gear, but I didn't need to know how to get this guy's tone or that guy's tone. I didn't care about like, oh, what does a Vox amp sound like? To me, they just sounded bright and I didn't understand them. Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't use a Vox amp, you know what I mean? Like Albert King didn't use it. So I liked Fender amps, and I liked Tube Screamers and Fuzz Faces and Strats, and I liked the stuff that I liked, but I didn't venture out and learn about other gear. Fast forward to moving to Los Angeles when I was 22, and having to figure out how to make a living as a guitar player, not as an artist, and having to get other people's sounds, that led me down the rabbit hole of learning about all of gear and tones, and learning to appreciate and realize, wait a minute, I like this tone better than what I used to do. And that was what opened the door for me to like, wait a minute, I love Vox amps. Wait a minute, Marshalls are necessary for this, and humbuckers are necessary for this, and Gretsch things are necessary for this, and whatever, phasers and rotary pedals and overdrives. And yeah, that was driven by necessity, by going to LA and having to make producers happy who were hiring me to do sessions, or artists who were hiring me to do gigs, because I'd never done that before. I didn't know what I was going to do when I moved to LA. You know, I had released records and done nothing but blues and my thing, and I got frustrated. I kind of was hitting the ceiling as a 22-year-old. That sounds ridiculous, but I was getting bummed out on being in the van and not making any money. Also, I met my wife, and I wanted to grow up. I wanted to be an adult, pay bills, have a family, do all those types of things that I saw coming up in my future. And I thought maybe the way to do that would be to just focus on being a guitar player, because I knew I was probably a good enough musician and guitar player to go make a living doing that, or at least try, as opposed to the artist thing, which is so hard. So yeah, it was just a prayer to go out there to LA and not know what I was going to do. It took a while before, you know, the phone started ringing enough, but I went out every night when I got there, shaking hands, going to jams, meeting whoever I could. And one little connection would turn into, hey, can you come play on my song for $100? And I'd do that. And next thing you know, that guy would pass my number on to someone else, and I'd end up playing a gig with somebody or doing a short tour with this person. And again, that was making me improve so much as a musician too, because I was being forced to not only learn about new tones and things, but new playing styles, new techniques, other kinds of music that I never played. You know, I never had to play R&B. Like I listened to Stax and Motown, but I didn't have to play Whitney Houston style R&B or, you know, 90s, 2000s. So like things like that, or heavier rock, like straight rock. I was a classic rock and blues guy. So like all of a sudden I would have to drop D for the first time in my life and do, you know, Nickelback was hot and things like that. So there were a lot of bands that were doing music like that, you know, Creed and stuff, where I'd have to figure out how to play those type of sessions and get those tones. All that made me such a better musician, which has now helped me as I move further into other things that I do. But yeah, that was the beginning of my expansion as a musician, and I loved it. I loved all the new stuff I was learning every day, and I loved the diversity of what I was able to get into in Los Angeles. Like it could be one day I could be playing on a soundtrack for a television show or a movie, and the next day making a singer-songwriter album, and the next day playing a hard rock thing, you know what I mean, and then play a blues gig or whatever. And I didn't think I could have that diversity if I had moved to Nashville or New York. That's why I chose LA. And I think for me it was the right move, because it's ended me up where I am now. Well, like I said, when I first moved to LA, I wasn't concerned at all with doing my own thing anymore. So I took a good few-year hiatus from doing it at all, because I was working. I was touring, you know, so I'd get these gigs with artists on major labels. Back then there was a lot more of that. You know, artists would go out and do these promotional tours. They'd hit radio stations and play club gigs. They'd go play in Barnes & Noble and Borders, do signings, and there were record stores back then and all that stuff. So I was doing a lot of tours with these artists who would be getting signed and doing these things. And like I said, I was growing as a musician. I was doing sessions when I was home. That was helping me grow as a musician. And that started to somehow build up my name, not as an artist necessarily, but just as a guitar player. Like the way that people, not that I'm comparing myself to Michael Landau or Michael Thompson or Lukather, but those guys, you know, were session legends, so much so that all of a sudden people started talking about them and paying attention to the records they would release on their own. And I started to notice a little bit of that was happening. Like I would get called by Guitar Magazine or something like that to do a story, and it wasn't about like the album that I had released or any of the things I used to do. It was more just about being a session guitar player, or just being a guitar player in general. Like I'd kind of built up a name as a professional guitar player. And so that made me think I needed to do a little bit more of my own thing. So I started to do new records and release stuff. Started to go overseas. I got a record deal in Europe, and I would go overseas and tour a little bit, doing my own thing again. And that reinvigorated me to doing my own thing. So I started playing more around LA, doing my own thing. And everything just kind of built naturally. I was working, touring, doing sessions. I got to play with some great artists and do some really great tours, artists I really admire and respect. But then all of a sudden it was like I was getting more requests to do my own thing. And so I thought, oh, I'm gonna do more of that. So I started doing that more and more and building that up. Also, I started to get these weird requests from people who wanted to hear from me like about teaching or hear from me about gear, or gear companies were interested in my input on like, why do I like something, or what am I into? I started to build up like currency in that regard, or credibility, where people tended to believe if I liked something, maybe I know what I'm talking about. So I started to dip my hands into all these things, and that was really cool, and it kind of ended up where I am now, except then people started asking me to produce records, and that came out of nowhere. I had only ever produced my own albums, and I really enjoyed doing that. And then I built my studio, but that was just for me. We'd been in LA for 10 years. It's expensive there. We couldn't buy a house. And finally the market dipped back in 2009 or whatever. And we bought a house, a crap fixer-upper that I fixed up. And it had this garage in the back detached that had been added onto illegally. But all I could see was that's gonna be my studio one day, because that's a very common thing in LA, And it took me a few years, but I built that studio and I thought, well, this is great. This will enable me, if people want me to do guitar sessions, I can just do them. They can send me the tracks and I can do them at home, really high quality. And then I could track my own records here. Because again, like I said, I was back into doing at least a new album every year or two. So this was a place for me. I could keep my gear out of the house. My wife is happy. I could play loud as I want. My kids are happy. And I could do those things that I was just talking about. But next thing I knew, other guitar players started saying, hey man, I saw you got your studio. I love your records and what you do on there and the tones you get. Would you help me produce this album? So of course I was like, I don't know how to do it, but yeah, let's try. And the second I started doing that, I fell in love with it. It was just a joy to kind of help someone else realize the vision or the sound that they're trying to approach, and maybe level that up even, try to get them somewhere they didn't even know they wanted to go. That was really fun, and really quickly it became like a thing I was doing a lot of the time when I was at home. So much so that like real artists were asking me to do it, and guitar players that I admired. Like Andy Timmons came to my studio and I produced his last album. That's a dude I grew up listening to play guitar, you know what I mean? And here he is in my guest house recording an album, and I'm writing tunes with him and producing it, and suggest, hey man, play it like this. I'm telling this guy, this is one of the best guitar players in the world. Hey, maybe you should play it like this. It was like crazy that it started happening. And then also I got really excited because my friend Joe Bonamassa started this label, Keeping the Blues Alive, because it's a charity for him. He's done really well, and it's a way to pay it forward and make records for artists that are really worthy but who need some help, maybe haven't got the push that they deserve. And the blues is my heart and my love, but also selfishly, I wanted to make blues records better than they'd been made, because it'd become where for people to make blues records, they had to call in every favor they could and do it on a shoestring budget, and not great blues records just weren't being made, and they're still not being made, not enough of them. So Joe was like, hey, I think you and I should start producing records together, because he'd never produced any and I had started doing it already. So he was like, dude, you've already done it. Let's do it together and we'll start producing these records. The first one we did was for Reese Winans, organ player from Double Trouble, who plays with Joe. So that was super cool because I'm a massive Stevie fan. So I went there to do this Reese Winans' first solo album. He had just turned 70 years old, was doing his first solo album. That was really fun. Joe and I produced that. And that was also, we realized we worked really well together. So now we've produced, 10, 15 records in the last few years for his label, but not just for his label, also for other people just call us now and hire us to produce. And I continue to do records on my own outside of the Joe and I partnership. And I love it because, man, just like the session stuff made me a better musician, this makes me a better musician. I learn more about arranging and recording and engineering, and everything with every one of these albums, and I just pushed to get better. And you'll see that's just a common theme with me as a person. I want to be better tomorrow than I am today at everything I do, whether it's playing guitar, engineering, recording, producing. I just want to grow somehow and improve. And yeah, producing is just a joy now. This work with Joe, it's a little different than like when I used to tour with Raphael Sadiq or other artists, and I knew I was just like the hired guitar player and I had a job to do. It's the same thing here. I'm the guitar player who's backing up Joe. I got to do what he wants. It's his gig. But we're such close friends. We're brothers, and you know, we're peers. We respect each other, but it's his gig. So I'm doing my job, and I'm back in the back doing what I do. But it is different because, you know, we do so much work together that we have a very open and frank relationship. But I still do realize that, hey, this is the job that I'm doing. I'm not the artist. I'm not stepping out there. I'm not doing any of that stuff. So yeah, you know, I treat it like a gig, like I would when I was with anybody. But it is slightly different because not just Joe, but like the rhythm section, Lamar on drums and Calvin on bass, these are my best friends. I've been playing with these. I brought them into Joe's band, you know what I mean? Like they're my best friends. They play with me. We played together with Raphael Sadiq. We've known each other forever. So I'm literally on the road with 3 of my best friends, you know? It's like a little different than just a hired gun situation, even though it is a hired gun situation. But yeah, I still approach it with the respect of, this person hired me, I need to do my job, you know, the way that I'm supposed to, and support him and do the job. So absolutely, that's a part of it. The best advice I can give any musician coming up now who wants to make a life out of this. I don't mean just make a living, but make a life. Like, this is what you want to do. Play as many gigs as humanly possible. And I'm sorry that it's not 2000 or 90 or 80 or 70, that it's 2023, and it's not the same. Everybody's on Zoom and on YouTube and on Instagram, and that's the world that we live in, and there's not as many go down and play covers for 4-hour gigs. I was playing at 14 years old, I was playing 3 nights a week for 4 hours, where I was forced to learn all these songs, and I was forced to solo all night long and build up stamina and vocabulary and learn on the fly, fall flat on my face and make mistakes and figure things out. And I wish that people had that opportunity now. It's just, you have to search it out now because there's not a lot of it anymore. There's not those bar gigs, there's not that scene. But whatever you can do to go, you know, if you have a friend in high school who's a singer-songwriter and she wants to go play at the coffee shop, go back her up. Learn her songs, even if they suck. Learn her songs and go do that gig. Learn a bunch of songs you don't like. Take a gig playing at a wedding. Find a function band. Do whatever you can, because on-the-job training counts 500% past what you do in your bedroom. Yes, you have to put in the work in the bedroom and learn the fundamentals and lay the groundwork, but the sooner you can get out and play gigs, the quicker you will grow and figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. And that's the best advice I can give anybody, is play as many gigs as possible. All right, Josh Smith here. So we just left Sweetwater, now we're at the Embassy Theater for sound check. Actually, we just finished sound check. I changed shirts, so sorry. Anyways, thought we'd go through my rig a little bit since we talked about it in the video. This is my corner of the stage over here. There's my pedal board. This was built by my friend Brian O'Million in Dallas, at least wired. The board was made by Schmidt-Array in Germany, which is an incredible board. It's about the 4th or 5th one I have of theirs built on this platform. Amazing stuff. I'll go through it quickly but in depth. It's all controlled by this Gig Rig G3 controller, which is a beautiful switcher and controller. I also augment it with the Morningstar MIDI controller. That's just for my purposes. You don't need that if you don't want, because the G3 will do all MIDI. But this enables me to keep the G3 in instant access mode and then change presets here on the fly with this. I have kind of a page for every pedal that accepts MIDI, and also a page of presets. So that way, let's say if I go to a preset like this and load a song, it'll load that preset, and then I can add patches on the fly on the G3, like add another pedal or whatever on the fly, and it lets me kind of modify as we go, which is great. Like that helps a lot in terms of expediency and such and such and such. So those are the brains of everything. And then as far as the pedals go, I've got the Peterson Mini Strobo Stomp tuner, and then the first pedal and the chains are actually underneath here. I've got the Argonaut, Mythos Argonaut, which is an octave up kind of green ringer style pedal, no controls. And then I've got my signature Vemorem Myriad Fuzz. So those are the first two pedals. Then it goes out of the board to the wah, because I like the wah off the board, and I like to have the wah both before and after dirt. So that's like inserted in the middle. So it's after the fuzz and the octave, but before the rest of the dirt pedals. So we've got octave, fuzz, wah, and then we come back out here. We got my main pedal, the Poly Flat 5, which is another signature pedal that I helped design with my friend Loki in Australia. That's my main drive pedal, based on a pedal that I've used for the last 15 years. If you've heard me play in the last 15 years, it's been the sound of that kind of thing. But this one is much more versatile, accepts MIDI, it has two sides, it has switchable diodes, which is really awesome. So you can go from Schottky diode, silicon diode, germanium diode, or an LED. So it's just a really cool pedal. Plus, it's got touch faders on it, which is kind of amazing. So, and it's all MIDI, really cool pedal. So that's my main pedal. From there, it goes to Kingtone Soloist, which was underneath. That's my tube screamer type pedal. I pretty much only use that with Strat style guitars. Then it goes to this love pedal Echo Plexi, which is my Marshall in a box type pedal. Really great pedal. Then it goes to a cool pedal underneath made by Audio Kitchen over in the UK called the Fake Plastic Trees, which is a really amp-like Vox style circuit in a pedal using FETs. And it's just the most amp-like natural drive pedal I've ever heard. And then from there, it hits my TC little mini flashback that I use only for slapback. And then it goes to the big boy, which is the Eventide H90, which is my jack of all trades. So, you know, Leslie rotary effects, trem, chorus, delays, reverbs, backwards effects, ring mods, and you know, that pedal is so powerful, can kind of do anything. That's the rig, and then I have three outputs. So I have a mirror of the left side, so if I want to have 3 amps, I can have 2 lefts basically, and then the right. So there's 3 outputs, but right now I'm only using 2. So we come out of the board, 2 outputs, and we hit the 2 amps. And then the left side is the 2-Rock Vintage Deluxe. This is the newest amp that 2-Rock makes. It's probably their most Fendery amp, I would say. Real straight up, simple, blackface style amp with trem and reverb, great reverb. It also has a switchable tone stack. You can switch from the blackface style tone stack here to a more tweed style tone stack, which is actually on the back of the amp. But yeah, this is a 100-watt version, which they don't make. I asked them to make me a 100-watt just so I can compete with the 7 amps that Joe has over there. So I needed something 100 watts to kind of keep up on stage. So this is my 100-watt Fendery style amp with a 410 cabinet, open back. And then the second amp is my Morgan Dual 40. And if you know, I've been using Morgans for 15 years. I have a signature Morgan JS12 and JS40. This is actually the first amp I ever got from Joe. This actual physical one is the first amp I ordered from him. It was in a different head shell when I got it. So I've had this amp a long time. It's the best sounding Vox style amp I've ever heard in my life, and it's never broken. It's just been such a workhorse for me. It's just a killer amp. It has 2 preamp inputs. So the first input is 12AX7 and the second input is EF86. I'm plugged into the 12AX7 channel, and literally there's 2 knobs, volume and cut, just like a great Vox style amp should be. It's loaded with Eminence Red Fang speakers. Those have 2-Rock's proprietary 10-inch speakers in there. That's the whole rig other than guitars. And the 2 main guitars I'm using on this tour are this custom AZ that Ibanez made for me, because I needed something more traditional than a regular AZ. So this has 3 single coil pickups in it, Ron Ellis pickups. They're absolutely incredible. It is what it looks like a really standard Strat style guitar. It's amazing. It has this actual factory neck off of my signature guitar, the Flat 5. So it's literally, this is the exact same neck as what's on my main guitar. But the other differences between this and a regular AZ, this has a 6-screw bridge, more vintage style, has a little bit less contouring, just a little bit more of a traditional thing. And like the neck on my guitar, it has traditional vintage tuners, etc., etc. This is a killer guitar, and obviously this covers all the S-style vibes that I need. And then my main guitar is this Flat 5-1. This is not one of the prototypes. This is off the line. It's my favorite one. Actually, it beat out the prototypes. Somehow the neck on this one ended up super dark. It's, you know, still maple neck, but when it got roasted, it ended up looking like mahogany. It's so dark, but this has been my favorite one. The only difference between this and one someone would buy at Sweetwater is this is the original prototype switch tip to get the feel and size right, so it's clear. We 3D printed it out, and I just like the way it looked. So the regular ones ship with black switch tips. Otherwise, this is stock with my signature Seymour Duncan pickups in it, which you can also get at Sweetwater. And yeah, this has been my main guitar since the day that it came out with Ibanez. I'm so proud of it, and I play it 95% of the time, and that's the rig. Oh, and I know because people will ask, 13 through 58 gauge strings, yes, tuned to standard pitch, and they're amazing strings made by my friend Gabriel Tenorio in Los Angeles, who makes hand-wound strings, full nickel. They're incredible strings. If you haven't ever tried a set of his strings, you should check them out.